If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide, here on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. We've got quite a lot to cover today, including the first EV with a native J3400 NACS port on board. We're going to talk about the new Chevy Equinox, how it drives, maybe talk about Volvo's Future, and definitely talk about the least expensive vehicles you can buy in the USA today. What is under $25,000? And then very last, we'll talk about some maybe tariff issues and why, for the sake of affordable transportation, inexpensive transport, we actually may want to change our tariff policy in the United States. So with that out of the way, let's just dive right into it. Travis, what would you have thought would be the first EV with a native J3400 port on it?
I would have guessed something along the Ford or Rivian line. Obviously, they were the first to sign up for Tesla's NACS adoption. If I was going to pick sort of out of left field, I would have said something like maybe a Silverado EV. I'm just thinking big, heavy, big battery, need juice. That might be where the priority goes. That's where I'd lean.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought too. I assumed it would be Ford. I mean, Ford was the first one on board with the adapters. Now you can get adapters on your Rivian. General Motors theoretically should be coming soon with the adapters. And maybe we should back up and describe what NACS is. So that's what Tesla calls their charge connector. The SAE standard designation now is J3400. They're basically the same thing. It's basically a synonym. They're compatible with one another. But I just discovered, and that the reason this episode is going live when it's going live, is that it's actually going to be the Hyundai Ioniq 5. Yeah, one of the least compatible EVs with a 400-volt charger.
I mean, because Hyundai has such a unique system, right? It already, if you try to use a Tesla supercharger, it doesn't work the way you would want it to. It's some of the slowest charging out there. Having a native onboard port, I don't think is going to fix that at all. It just means that it's easier to pull up and use, not that it's going to charge any faster.
Right. And we are waiting for some clarification from Hyundai on this. So we have some questions out to them about, so guys, are you going to somehow improve the DC to DC conversion? The nutshell nature of this problem is that the Ioniq 5 and every eGMP platform EV from Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis has a very high pack voltage. So in order to charge from a lower voltage station, all Teslas are 400-volt nominal systems. All the eGMP systems are 800-volt brand plate systems. It doesn't actually mean 800 volts. They're really around 600 volts. But the nutshell here is that you have to bump the voltage up from what the Tesla station can provide to what the battery in the Ioniq 5 will accept. And this is a system that's somewhat similar, or a problem that's somewhat similar between the Lucids, the Hyundai, Kia, Genesis vehicles, and the Porsche, Audi EVs that are 800 volts. But Hyundai takes a different course to boosting the voltage. On the other vehicles, by and large, we see a dedicated EV boostage circuit. So like in the Porsches, you can choose between two different options, 50 kilowatts or 150 kilowatts, and that's the current and voltage limit for that system. On the Hyundai products, they actually have a really novel and innovative way of doing this. They use the coil in the rear electric motor as part of the boost circuit. You guys can Google how boost circuits work, but basically it requires an inductor coil. And they use that coil to provide the functionality for this boost circuit to function. But there are some limits, and there were some software oopsies and problems with the interoperability of Teslas and eGMP vehicles. So last time I had spoken to anybody at Hyundai and Kia, the theoretical maximum limit was just over 100 kilowatts, but you were really only getting about 50 to 60 kilowatts because of this software limitation. And they haven't said whether they're going to fix that or not.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a very clever idea. And if the component already exists in the vehicle, being able to maximize its function is great. I'm all for it. And as we've talked about before, the Kia EV6, the Ioniq 5, those are some of the best road trip vehicles because of their fast charging capability. The fact that they're going to be one of the first onto the supercharger network natively, at least plug wise, right? They're still not fully fully worked in. Just means it's going to be a better road trip car. But the question really is, like you said, is it going to be who's going to fix the problem? And it's an issue between Hyundai and Tesla. Obviously, the systems just work differently. And I don't know if Tesla's going to be super incentivized to hurry up and fix that because it's not necessarily their issue.
Exactly. The core problem and the reason they charge slower than their design intent is simply a mismatch between the way that the Tesla superchargers are reading the impedance in the system seemingly and how the vehicle is reacting with that. It should be addressable via software, but how that aligns, we don't know. And it's worth noting that the Hyundai announcement did not include Supercharger Access yet. So we know that Hyundai has said that they will be doing that in the future. That was a previous press release. But this news release is just simply that it's going to have the J3400 connector native on the vehicle. Didn't say anything about when that vehicle would actually be able to roll up to a supercharger station and charge.
Right.
Oddly enough, that means that all of these Ioniq 5s are going to need adapters, and they are going to come with basically, this adapter right here. So if you guys are listening to the podcast, you can't see this, but what I'm holding up here is a third-party CCS to Tesla adapter. These have been around for a while. There's a native Tesla one that you could buy from the Tesla parts catalog, or you could buy a whole bunch of these, imitation ones. But basically, you're actually going to need one of these to charge your Ioniq 5 at its fastest pace, at least for the moment.
Yeah, and obviously we call it the Tesla connector, the NACS, but really these J3400 stations are going to be going in, obviously not immediately. The ones that are in right now are Teslas, essentially, unilaterally. But the next generation of EV installs is probably going to be these J3400s. So as those start to cross, that's where you're going to have that issue with the adapters. It's an interesting point, though, because people will look at it and go, oh, that's the Tesla one. Obviously, there's going to be some education that's required here. But in the meantime, again, if Tesla's trying to help Hyundai improve the charging capacity or capability at the superchargers, if they can go ahead and sell more of those adapters, that's another reason maybe not to hurry up.
And it should be noted that the V4 supercharger stations shouldn't have a problem with the Hyundai Kias because they're 800-volt native as well. And then the last thing I should probably mention that I'm still waiting for other clarification on is Hyundai really going to be supporting 277-volt AC charging? Because that could be a much bigger deal. And for me, that's the big reason to go J3400. The other changes are relatively minor. The latch mechanism is a little bit smaller, a little bit sexier on J3400. People don't really DC fast charge that often, so the DC fast charging stuff is kind of a red herring in some ways. But with the J3400 connector, the ability to support a single phase of common industrial 480-volt three-phase power is a huge deal. So it would mean, like, in this office space where I'm recording this podcast, on the other side of that wall, we have chargers for employees, etc. And it would mean that we would be able to install more chargers because they wouldn't have to run through the transformer, the step-down transformer in the office. So for me, support for 277-volt charging is a much bigger deal because I firmly believe that the right place for you to charge your EV is not necessarily at your home at night, because that's not when we have the most green power available. It's actually at your place of work during the day, especially the early part of the day. That's when we get a lot of renewables online. It would actually help EV adoption, especially if you live in a condo or a townhouse or something where you can't necessarily install a charger at home. I think that encouraging workplace charging is a huge thing. And the new J3400 standard, based on NACS, of course, allows that higher voltage charging. So you can just use that single phase, don't have to run it through a step-down transformer, and quite simply support more EVs charging simultaneously at a lower cost. Also, fun twist, if you're charging at 277 volts, your EV charges faster.
Exactly. I mean, it's not going to be leaps and bounds, but faster is faster. And I think the other thing that would be hugely beneficial, like you mentioned, is if you're charging at work, number one, the office can put more of these in for cheaper, and they're going to be faster when they're being utilized. But if folks aren't able to charge all day at work, or their battery is really low from the weekend, they wouldn't necessarily have to go home and have a 240 volt installed at the house. They could do a trickle charge to get them to and from the office. So it just opens up a lot of possibilities, but it is part of the huge paradigm shift when we're talking about why would my office pay for my fuel, but it's just a different equation.
Exactly. And to that point, I will just diverge just a tiny bit because I know we're going to get comments in the comment section about that. How we do it is we use RFID enabled chargers. So, the employee goes up and scans their RFID card on the charger, and then we get the bill and the billing details about who charged and when, and then we just payroll deduct it for the employees. So it's a super easy process. I mean, it takes very little time to administer. Yes, there's some administration involved. So if you're a big company, you got hundreds of employees, don't get me wrong, there may be extra man hours involved, but it's a relatively small thing to just add that extra convenience and give your employees some additional options. So with that out of the way, let's dive into our next thing. Let's continuously variably shift here into the new Chevy Equinox. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, I mean, they made some pretty serious changes, at least to the exterior, and I'm calling it sort of a truckified look. The old Equinox, there was nothing wrong with it visually, but this is definitely a bolder, stronger stance, and it's what we've seen in the entire Chevy crossover and SUV lineup. Is just this bulkification of the crossover, and the only downside, really the biggest difference between the look and the performance really has to do with that engine, because it's not the burliest engine, even though it's got nice big shoulders now on the outside.
Yeah, so tell me about that. So we just have the one engine now, 1.5 liter
Hmm.
turbo,
Yep.
and two different transmissions though.
We do. So CVT for the front wheel drive, 8-speed automatic for the all wheel drive. There was an old 6-speed that's gone completely. And the torque curves are just a little bit different for those front wheel drive and all wheel drive outputs, which I appreciate, right? Just a little bit of
Mhm.
attention to detail. I will say I'm generally not someone who has any issues with the CVT. I know there are plenty who do. But I will say that the 8-speed felt way better. And while I'm pretty on board with front wheel drive, that engine having those gears set up the way they were, it just felt so much more responsive on the 8-speed and a little bit more fun to drive. Obviously, all-wheel drive gets a little bit more traction, a little bit more punch off the line, but I'd have to say I would definitely go for the all-wheel drive. The question, though, and this is another interesting part about that Equinox, is they really have like a triangle. It's a reverse triangle. I can't really flip that, but a reverse triangle layout, because they've got the entry level trim, your LT,
Mhm.
and then it splits. It just forks. Are you going RS or are you going active? And the pricing's the same.
Right.
And the LT can also have some of the somewhat exclusive pieces of the active or the RS, so like the optional non-body color roof. Well, it's black if it's an RS, it's white if it's an active, but it's black or white or body color if it's an LT. So there's really not a wrong way to do it. I think, heated rear seats are the only thing you can't get on the LT.
Mhm.
Besides maybe a wheel or whatever. But anyway, that's the biggest split. So it's an interesting way to do it. Everything's pretty bunched up. Starts at $30,000 though, so it's not going to make the list we talk about later of less expensive vehicles.
Indeed. But I am intrigued to see how low that price will go. I mean, as we typically see
Hmm.
with GM, we're going to be driving the GMC version at some point a little bit later this year. But with both of these, the Chevy or the GMC, just whichever look you like, because they're the same thing.
Hmm.
We generally see a lot of cash on the hood. So that MSRP at the moment, I will tell everybody, seems a little bit high. If you're paying MSRP for your Equinox or your Canyon, or whatever. That's not a Canyon. What is the GMC version?
Terrain, right?
Terrain. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So if you're paying MSRP for your Equinox or your Terrain, I would say something has gone wrong. You need to either wait a little bit or find a new dealer. You should be getting a few $1,000s off the top, and at
Hmm.
that point, it should be a pretty decent deal. I do like that GM 8-speed as well. I have to agree with that. And the one interesting twist, if you guys are worried about efficiency, etc., is the 8-speed with the all-wheel drive setup. It's a very GM thing. It's not all-wheel drive until you press that all-wheel drive button. So it
Hmm.
doesn't matter how much slip those front tires are doing, they will just spin and spin and spin and spin until you hit the all-wheel drive button. Then it will send power to the back. So you do lose a little bit of efficiency by having all-wheel drive and that extra weight on board, but GM's really trying to limit the damage, I guess you'd say, from having all-wheel drive. They really want that efficiency number, and that's the way they do it. So you kind of almost get the best of both worlds: the extra torque,
Hmm.
the 8-speed, but you give up a little bit of fuel economy.
It's a little bit, and I will say the price difference is also reasonable. I believe it's $2,000, so it's right in line with everything else you'd expect. The only disappointment, and it's sort of can it cash the check, is when you have an RS trim. And for folks not familiar with Chevy lineups, RS is the sporty trim.
Hmm.
There's bigger wheels is really the biggest differentiating factor. Bigger standard wheels and then bigger optional wheels.
Yeah.
A few paint colors, but that's one of the only ones where I go, listen, if you're going to call this an RS, I'd love to see if it had a different tune, a little more something happening there. It looks good. It drives very nicely. It's just that's the one where I say if it's a sporty trim or the sport version or the RS throughout the lineup tends to be this. I'd love to have seen that come through, but I do think that Active is going to be pretty popular. One last touch: the Active has genuine all-terrain tires on it. Not, it's going to be a soft roader. There's not really
Hmm.
any other mechanical components that make it any more capable off-road. There's no distinguishable difference in ride height, but those tires are going to be a lot louder on the road than people are used to because most folks do not drive around with all-terrain tires. And so
It's
if
true.
you're coming from a cross trek and you say, "Oh, I want to try something different," these are going to be knobbier than what you're used to on your cross trek, and it's not going to be as capable as a cross trek wilderness because it just doesn't have all the same mechanical components to it. So it's an interesting choice there. On the highway, you definitely notice the tire noise.
Yep, indeed. And with the Equinox out of the way, let's dive into more of a, I guess, a fundamental, foundational question here, which is Volvo's future. I know that
Hmm.
there has been a lot said about this in the U.S. The U.S. media seems to love to try and pick apart like what's going on at Volvo and roadmap and game this thing with their parent company, Geely or Geely, however you want to pronounce that. I'll let you guys do you. It's a
Flip a coin.
tomato thing apparently, and sort of how they're going with the EV transition. Because we've been seeing a lot of news. We just drove the EX90,
Hmm.
and the new XC90 or refreshed XC90 is coming very soon. So by the time you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, it's likely already dropped, and it is a mild refresh of the XC90. It's not an all new one.
Hmm.
Rather, unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it. And
Hmm.
that is the tricky thing is that, obviously when we're talking about English speaking news and English speaking media, it has a very American focus logically. We're the biggest English speaking car market in the world. But the English speaking market is not Volvo's biggest market. This actually surprised me. Volvo sales are dramatically up over the last few years. They are probably going to hit at least 700,000 units sold worldwide by the
Hmm.
end of this year, which puts them closer to Lexus than ever before. Lexus sold 820,000 cars last year, so they're within striking distance of Lexus. Volume-wise, bigger than Infiniti, bigger than Acura, etc. But most of that sales and that sales growth is happening in Europe and China. At this point in time, their European sales are 3 times what their sales are in the US, and China is about 20% larger than the US market. And that means that Volvo is in a really weird and interesting position because we don't see that same kind of sales split in the other European luxury car makers.
Right.
The US has historically been BMW, Mercedes, and Audi's largest markets in the world. And so Volvo's, trajectory and their products definitely march to a different drummer. How does that strike you?
I think number one, it's impressive because I think they have a significant enough presence here in the United States. I mean, it's not like there are no Volvos.
Hmm.
I think they're probably getting a little bit more popular. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly, in what circles people are more on board with Volvo than they have been, but it feels like there's more Volvo around. What I will say is that the differentiation, 3 times larger is enormous considering how many cars we buy versus how many
Hmm.
cars other countries don't. Um, and it's interesting because we see so much focus on U.S. models, and they're U.S. models, and then they get adjusted for other markets, and we tend to see a lot less success if it's very U.S. focused. So for Volvo to have different models that are just not built for us, yet some of us are still buying them, I think is a good
Yeah,
thing. It's a little bit more diverse, right? If it's really the European option because they're not thinking about us. We just
exactly.
happen to be interested in it.
And that's what I have personally always found interesting about the Volvo brand, especially over the last few decades. Um, Even under Ford, there were some models that never made it to the US. By and large, most Volvo models end up in the US. There are a few that have never made it across the pond, mind you. But they are, until recently, the only major European car company not building cars in the US, not designing drivetrains just for the US. And Volvo really doesn't design anything specifically for the US market, which is definitely very different at BMW and Mercedes. I mean, not only do BMW and Mercedes design big SUVs for the US market and then sell them wherever else, they build those models only in the US. So if you're buying a big BMW SUV or a big Mercedes SUV, generally speaking, it's built in the United States and then sent back to Germany because they just still simply sell so many more of them here that they were
Yeah.
designed for our market first and those markets later. That's why they have big engines, V8s, turbocharged inline sixes, etc. And this is the answer when people ask, why isn't Volvo doing this? Why did Volvo get rid of the 6-cylinder? Why no V8 in the XC90 anymore? And it's like, well, the 3 times greater sales in Europe, they can't have them for emissions reasons, profitability reasons, etc. And this also explains why there's so many plug-in hybrids and EVs. This is the further mind twist. Volvo now has the second best-selling EV in Europe. And it's pretty close to the bestseller in terms of volume to the Model Y.
And unfortunately, we don't have it yet.
Yeah, but it is coming. So that is, and this is where things get political and tricky. That is a Chinese-made EX30. Although it appears that we will be getting in Europe, we will be getting a European-built EX30 as well, because they are spinning up a production facility in Belgium to build the EX30. We don't know exactly where those EX30s will go. There are some tariffs on Chinese imports in Europe. They're not huge, but it appears that Volvo is trying to hedge their bet there. Canada and the US have very high tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles. So our EX30s are going to come from Belgium. We'll see how that affects them long term. And then, interestingly, probably because of that Chinese connection, we also see a Volvo minivan in China, which I think is kind of cool and sort of wish we had in the U.S. But
yeah, I don't know how terribly well it would do here, but I would like to see it as an option.
I'm assuming it would sell very, very badly here.
There's probably a reason there aren't a lot of luxury minivans.
Yeah, it would be hilarious and fun. I am really shocked, though, that in Europe, not only is the EX30 selling quite well, it's selling better than the Volkswagen EVs. And Europe loves some Volkswagens. So that's the part of that sales figure that really did surprise me.
I mean, overall, I think they also have a pretty good mix of offerings. I mean, the whole world is leaning towards crossovers, and they definitely have their crossovers and SUVs covered. But you do still see a sprinkling of a wagon here. We don't have enormous SUVs, so there's a whole part of the US market that just won't reach it. I mean, we drove the EX90, similar size to the XC90, but in a few weeks we'll drive something much bigger. And I don't even know what our schedule looks like. I just know there will be something bigger on the schedule that Volvo doesn't offer. And so it's an interesting split. And then because there are so few models, it's not Toyota. There are not 20 Volvo models here in the US. You get something like an XC40 and a C40, which are ostensibly the same vehicle, just with a slightly different shell. And the fact that those are, they're still popular. We don't see a whole lot of hatchbacks and sedans anymore, right? There used to be both, and now there's kind of one or the other. So it's just interesting how they have things split. I would just love to see, and put me on the record, I'd love to see a few more wagons stick around.
Yeah.
If not, be added. At least, please still stick around.
I am hoping, perhaps beyond hope, that that we will get another grouping of Volvo wagons. I would kind of expect them to get condensed into just one wagon. Having two sizes of wagon is great for Sweden and solid for Europe, but in America, sadly, they don't sell that well.
I know, and if we get a wagon that sticks around, it'll probably be the bigger one, and I'd prefer the smaller one. But I'm also guilty because I haven't gone and purchased the smaller wagon right now, so I'm part of the problem.
There you are. You need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. You need to go buy those things if you want them to stick around. So that brings us along to this tricky question of EV tariffs, and trust me, guys, this is tied with our next topic, which is affordable vehicles. Tariffs if you listen to economics podcasts and study economics at all, you know that there is a wide variety of opinion when it comes to the efficacy and the purpose of tariffs. They're largely used as protectionist measures on an economy. So, we want to put high tariffs on imported goods because we want to shelter some sort of developing, incubating industry in our own home country. But they can also act as crutches long term that can harm consumers in a way. And I would argue in a way that the tariff on light trucks in North America is one of those harms, because we have for decades and decades and decades had a tariff on light truck imports in the US. And that's why we see so little truck innovation, I would argue. We can't get that adorable Volkswagen truck from Europe. We can't even get the adorable small trucks that the big three American car companies make in South America in the US because they're not made in North America. So, people ask, why don't we have those cute Chevy trucks or the Australian Utes, that Ford used to make that were epic with rear wheel drive and inline sixes. And the answer is because they don't build them here, so they can't import them here. I am curious to see if this new round of Chinese-focused car tariffs generally and EV-focused tariffs specifically, how that really is going to impact affordability in the US, because there are two different thoughts on this. The first thought is, well, if EVs come in from China and they're super duper cheap and the batteries are crazy cheap because we can't afford to build batteries that way in the US, then this is going to mean that the American car companies and American manufacturing is going to go by the wayside because they can't compete. And that by giving them a tariff, that we can help support native industry, build it up, and then maybe at some point they can be better and more agile at competing globally. The other side of this thing, though, is that it means we don't have inexpensive cars in the US. I mean, we've all seen the headlines, this cheap car, that cheap car in China or India or wherever, because the cheap cars around the world are not limited just to China. And we can't get those in the US for a variety of reasons. I have always wondered, since so few car companies are willing to develop inexpensive vehicles for North America, wouldn't maybe the answer here be no tariffs on super cheap cars? Because then we could reap the economic benefit of affordable, reliable transportation for people that are looking for that. If you're an employee somewhere and your job is critical to your family's well-being and their safety and security, et cetera, their financial security, then, and your budget's low and your only option is going out and buying a 10-year-old car that maybe is not that reliable, not that efficient, et cetera, has no warranty, then you're going to miss days from work. Maybe you get laid off because you were missing too many days or something like that. Maybe you lose your job entirely. How is that good for the economy? Where instead of that, maybe you could have something that's truly affordable, say $15,000 with guardrails around it that says, okay, you can sell that $15,000 car here without tariffs, but it's got to have a really long warranty. It's got to meet certain crash standards, et cetera. Then that means that person now has reliable transport to get to their day job, and they don't risk losing it and losing everything because of some financial hardship that occurred.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both live pretty rural, right? So if you want to take a bus to work, what in the world would that look like?
That would take, I think, a 10-mile hike to the nearest bus stop. So,
yep, I'd hop on my bike and it'd be a significant ride to get to a spot where I could hop on a bus. So it's one of those things where, it's a very broad scope, and there are some risks. The big question is, how would it affect the economy? And I love where you're coming from. The flip side is, and the manufacturers who are here, who are currently building the cars, would say, oh, that's going to undercut everything we do. We're not going to be able to compete with this, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we end up looking at two different sets of regulations. Obviously, they have to meet safety standards, and our safety standards are different than other countries where all these vehicles are built and sold, et cetera, et cetera. But if we said, hey, this extra cheap vehicle, this inexpensive offering can be, maybe it doesn't have to have a backup camera standard. Maybe it doesn't have to have, XYZ new technology built in. That's obviously going to be one of those things that makes the car less expensive to build. But then, then there's going to be the argument that we're not putting safer cars on the road. But again, if you look at that 10-year-old car, what technology does that 10-year-old car have that that the new ones don't, because more people are driving that
Exactly.
10-year-old car than they are buying the new one. So it's this big thing where it says, hey, listen, let's talk about reality, not this ideal option. But when it comes down to protecting our economy, protecting our manufacturers, protecting our workforce, I do think we need to have something in place so that there are countries making products that are not to the same standard, not to the same requirements. They're not employing their people to the same level or livable wage or whatever that we require here for cars in the United States. That's something we have to be careful of. But at the same time, our cars just keep getting more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's a complicated question if you start thinking about the ethics and welfare of employees in another country. Then that
Mm-hmm.
definitely adds some additional complications. I think that there may be ways to guide around that. And if you're trying to sell a mainstream vehicle that can solidly be built in the U.S. for a fair price, et cetera, and you're trying to dump those products in the American market, I can see protectory tariffs on things like that. Like if you're going to try and import trucks into California, into the U.S., and you're going to try and undercut your competition by $10,000, then sure, yeah, I think protectionary tariffs make sense. I
Mm-hmm.
think I am less concerned about that in areas where the other car companies simply choose not to compete, specifically that affordable vehicle segment.
Yeah.
Um, because interestingly, I mean, America's population is still growing, but
Mm-hmm.
oddly enough, we are not selling necessarily as many new vehicles as we used to every year. So when you look at the pie, the average car in America is getting older and older and older. That percentage
Yeah.
share of old cars on the road is growing and growing. Part of that, of course, is because new cars are more reliable than they've ever been. So those 2000Z cars that maybe don't look great, but were built only 20 years ago, they were significantly more reliable than the cars were 20 years before that. So
Mm-hmm.
they're lasting a lot longer on the road, but are they as safe? Do they have all the the gadgets to make sure you don't back over your children in your driveway, etc.? The answer is no.
Yeah.
So there's some benefit to saying, okay, maybe you could have a cheap car, but it's got to actually still meet all the modern safety requirements. And so instead of buying that 20-year-old used something that's not going to be as reliable, not necessarily going to be as safe, maybe there is a different answer.
Another thought is, if we are talking about protective tariffs, one of the things that we could focus on and just understand that the average new car buyer is not going to be the one specifically looking at these cars. If the intent or the belief is that this is going to bring in a new shopper, which is
Hmm.
going to benefit the country in a number of ways, like we talked about, this could also be an interesting place to institute sort of a cash for clunkers offer, where it says, hey, listen, if you are, this income, these requirements, and this is your vehicle, some of those tariffs coming in can help support that system, because that's something, again, assuming we're built to pretty modern standards, is going to make a bigger impact on getting some of those less safe, less reliable, less polluting, or more polluting
Hmm.
vehicles off the road and getting something a little bit newer on.
Yep. And with that out of the way, let's roll into our main topic, which is the best affordable under $25,000 new car you can buy in
Mhm.
America. And for the purposes of this one, I know it's somewhat complicated, but we're going to actually not talk about destination. So remember, destination is going to add $1,000 to $1,500 to any of these price tags, but the focus here is cars that you could buy out the door for $30,000. So like any of these vehicles, destination, tax, title, license in whatever state you live in should be solidly under $30,000. Before we get into
Mhm.
this bracket style meltdown here, so we can find the best cheap car in America, let's talk about what probably will qualify and what won't qualify anymore. The Ford Maverick has now gone over $25,000 for the base model. The
Mhm.
Honda HR-V is just over $25,000 as well.
Mhm.
Probably will qualify, but we don't know yet because pricing is not out for 2025. The Mitsubishi Outlander Sport, which is probably going to be getting a major refresh or redesign. The Corolla Cross, no pricing yet, but it was pretty low for 2024, so it's probably in the party. And the Volkswagen Taos, we don't have pricing yet on either, but probably under 25. So let's just roll into the options here. First up, Chevy Trax or Kia Soul. What is your thought?
The Kia Soul is one of the absolute best bang for the bucks money can buy. It's because it does so many things, and one of those is practicality, cargo practicality. It fits really tall people in a footprint that is not
Hmm.
large, right? A lot of people in this
Exactly.
country say, "I want more room for myself. I'm going to buy a Tahoe," and you can get just as much headroom in a Kia Soul or close to it. So that one's tough for me, but stylistically, I really like what Chevy's done with the Trax. And so while it's a tough head to head, I have to lean towards the Trax here. Even though I have personally recommended a lot of Kia Souls to individuals, those were used Kia Souls, and it's before the Trax existed.
Mm. Yeah, I admit being really torn here because the Trax was our affordable car of the year last year, but the Soul was not eligible since it wasn't new. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I can convince you on this. We have to bash out an agreement here that we can agree with. But I would
We
I
can do
would
that.
suggest I would suggest Soul over Trax primarily because it is a hair less expensive.
Hmm.
You also get a lot more room on the inside because of that boxy profile.
You
If
do.
you want some of the nicer features and options, you can get them in the Soul, and it's still gonna be pretty affordable. Also, though, the Soul has a really long warranty that we don't find on the Trax.
That's true. That's a good point. So I
Mhm.
am happy saying let's move forward with the Soul.
Oh, there we
I
go.
really like the styling on the Trax, but again, bang for the buck, and I have recommended it many times. Kia Soul's hard to beat. It's a strong
Yeah.
start.
10-year, 100,000-mile warranty, on the powertrain, that goes a long
Hmm.
way, especially if you're concerned about things. Both have slightly controversial assets or attributes. The Soul has a CVT. Not everybody likes that. The
Hmm.
Trax has a 3-cylinder turbo. So, give and take.
Right.
Next up, we have the Nissan Sentra versus the new Kia K4. What's your pick? I'm definitely K4.
I have to go K4. It's obviously more expensive. We're looking at about $2,000 more expensive, and at
Hmm.
this point, that's almost 10% more. It's a lot of money, but it's a sharp vehicle, and it's nothing against Nissan. They're going to show up on this list a few times. They put out some affordable vehicles, and for that, I appreciate them. But
Hmm.
K4 is a sharp looking car.
Yep, I agree. And I would go K4, but I would have the asterisk here that, if you guys could get $3,000 off or $2,000 off that Sentra, then, hey, Sentra all the way if it's cheap enough.
Yeah,
Then
and
we
that's a
have
that's
the,
a big part of this head to head is we're trying to figure out at MSRP, and some of these are only going to sell at MSRP or just below because of a
yep,
Labor Day sale. Some of them are going to be way below consistently, and we just have to have a baseline.
yep. And we will talk about that sort of general discount here as we go along this list.
Mhm.
Next up, we have the Volkswagen Jetta versus the Nissan Kicks. Bearing in mind the Nissan Kicks, you can get all-wheel drive in the U.S. for under $25,000, 23,330.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying that the world is losing sedans, so I appreciate the Jetta still exists, but I don't think it has as strong of a dollar offering. You can get a nice Jetta; it can get
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit more expensive here, but the kicks can come pretty loaded. And the fact that you can get all wheel drive in that head to head, I'm going to lean towards the Nissan kicks. It's a cool redesign.
Yep, kicks for the win for me too here. So let's move on. The next one is two sort of a sedan and a sedan.
Hmm.
The Hyundai Elantra and the Buick Envista. The Envista, of course, is the close relative to the Trax, but it starts 2 grand higher because there's no corollary to the base version of the Trax.
Right
It's not
now,
technically a sedan, but it kind of looks like one.
see, and I want to kick this one back to you because I have a hard time deciding whether or not I could say I would choose a Buick. I'm just not necessarily the
Mm.
age demographic I think they're shooting for.
Yeah, I mean, you are the age demographic they're shooting for. My grandparents are the age demographic that, in my mind, buy Buicks, and
Right.
all 4 of them are dead. Let's just say that. So, anyway, Buick is trying to elevate their image, and I think they've done a good job. But in this pairing, I would have to go with Elantra. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of some of the angular styling bits, I
Mhm.
like the fact that the Elantra is really quite cheap and less expensive, oddly enough, than that smaller Buick. But also, you can get the hybrid in it still, and that's one of the most efficient hybrids in America.
You're also getting a pretty decent warranty with that Hyundai. So
Hmm.
I'm with you there. I'm more on board, I think, with the styling than you are. And I do have a little bit of difficulty with Buick styling. I know, these are just pieces of the puzzle. I like the offering, but I probably go with Elantra.
And this leads us to the most epic battle in the compact sedan lineup. Civic versus Corolla. Got to set the stage here. So Corolla, $22,050. Civic, about $2,000 more expensive. The Civic has a Sportback thing, which you can't get for the price involved here, really, because that's going to be a little bit too expensive. And then the Corolla also has a hatchback, more traditional hatchback, but it's on the small side of things. Both are going to feature hybrid systems. Both are pretty reliable, although the reliability win statistically seems to go to the Corolla.
Yeah, and I get the numbers. I'll have to. I mean, there's a little bias here, and I'll admit the bias. I tend to be a Honda owner more than I've been a Toyota owner, and it's just the way the car feels. And it's nothing against Toyota, and I think they put together a good product. But for my money, I tend to enjoy being a Honda just a little bit more. So I think I'm gonna have to lean towards the Civic. Disappointed we can't get the Sportback in there, and they call it a hatchback, but that is really stretching what we would consider a hatchback. But I think my vote goes Honda.
I would have to agree here, and I know this is going to be, cause some consternation, but my explanation is twofold. The Corolla is just a little bit boring. I mean, it always has been boring. It's been reliable, safe, boring, etc. All those usuals. But for me, it's some of the size concerns around it. The Corolla's quite tight inside. It's pretty hard to get regular humans in the back, and the Civic is definitely more generous in terms of its sizing. I don't care for that new nose on the Civic. I don't know how you feel about that design, but I think the interior in the Civic does it for me. It just looks and feels better than the one in the Corolla.
Yeah, I exterior design. I feel like the Civic might be growing up a little bit too much. I mean, it's just there used to be a bigger split between the Civic and the Accord, and they're getting really close. And I don't think I hate it, but it's probably not my preference.
So let's move on. We now have Nissan Versa versus Mazda 3. Before you think this is an easy pairing, everybody out there listening, keep in mind that it's pretty easy for the Versa to be less than half the price of a Mazda 3. So tricky one here. Versa still exists. Rumor mill says 2025 will be the end of the road for it. And the Mazda 3, of course, you can get as a sedan or a hatch, but you're really talking basically the sedan for under $25,000. And you're basically talking about a low end Mazda 3 because it's pretty close to the limit.
Yeah, and I'm a previous Mazda 3 owner, I really liked it, but for this head to head, we're talking about way less expensive on that Versa, and a fully equipped Versa is not going to be the same as a fully equipped Mazda 3, but you are still going to be able to get that fully equipped Versa, which is going to have some more features than you're going to find on that equally priced Mazda. So I think if we're talking about bang for the buck, I think I'm leaning towards Nissan.
Wow. I have to agree. I'm kind of in that head over heart here as well. It is so much less expensive to get the Versa. And admittedly, for that base price of the Versa, we are talking manual transmission, although I think that's probably the Versa that I would get.
I'm pro manual, so
yeah. If you're worried about CVT longevity, just get the manual Versa. Not a lot of power, let's be frank. It's a slug. But it's going to be a slug that you can probably put 100,000 miles on in 5 years, and it's going to be way cheaper than almost anything else in the U.S. Insurance is cheap on it as well, and you're probably going to get some cash on the hood on that Versa, since for some reason Versa sales have slowed down. And before we crown Versa the winner here, which I'll just jot down, I will put out this data point that I think is shocking. Versa, it's not only collecting up on dealer lots, but they've also reduced production at Nissan to try and compensate for the lower sales. So this is not, it's not sales restricted. The sales didn't go down to some 40,000 units or so in the last year because they couldn't build enough. It's because people aren't buying enough. And there was a time where Versa sold more than 100,000 units a year more than they do today. And I am honestly surprised that not only have the options dried up in this used and the affordable car segment, which leads a lot of people to say, why aren't there more affordable cars in America? But it does seem to be driven by customer demand. The reason we don't have affordable cars in America is because nobody's buying those affordable options.
Well, and if we're talking about, okay, here's how many they used to sell, and we're looking at this list, and under 20,000, I think I've got two listed here, and this one's quite a bit under. That means
Yep,
that the competition should be drying up. Therefore, they should be taking a bigger split of the pie, and they're not. So
yep,
this is one of those things, and this might be one of the reasons I went Versa as well. Is just holding on to it, saying here is a car that you could buy brand new when you're coming out of college.
exactly.
If you get a mid level or good entry of the job, you can make this car payment. You can not worry about your maintenance issues for 3, 4, 5 years. You got warranty covering this thing. Um, it just doesn't exist. So
Hmm.
I want it. I don't know if I want it
Yeah.
all the way to the top, but I want it now.
And I will say that what I hear a lot from people asking questions about these or commenting about videos that we've done is sort of like, oh, don't buy that. Buy a used Toyota Camry or a used Toyota Corolla. And,
Hmm.
there's certainly a market for used Camry, but any way you slice it, it's likely that that used Camry or the used Honda Civic, we did this analysis actually last when we reviewed the Versa. When you do the numbers on this, a 5-year-old Civic is about the same price, thanks to its high resale value in
Hmm.
this area, as a base CVT Nissan Versa. But the Versa is more fuel efficient, has a warranty on it, will finance for less, and over the
Hmm.
next 5 years will actually cost you less than that Honda Civic, according to Edmunds. When you look at their true cost to own, which includes
Hmm.
repairs, maintenance, expected cost of insurance, depreciation, etc.,
Yep.
that brand new Versa actually did okay, even in the depreciation section versus that used Honda Civic. So, keep in mind that there's more to this equation than simply the purchase price. There's also the cost of operation, and that cost of operation on the Versa is going to be bargain basement.
And the
Uh,
financing is going to be a big part there for sure.
exactly. So let's move along here, and this one is fun. So Chevy Trailblazer, $23,100 versus Chevy Malibu, which is theoretically 25,100, but we all know that there are so many cash on the hood discounts on that ancient Malibu. You could probably walk away with one for almost Nissan Versa pricing.
Yes, you could, but I think it's going to feel like an older car.
Oh
And
yeah,
if you're coming in with fresh money, you want something a little bit newer. And I honestly, I really like what the Trailblazers, just the all-wheel drive version of the Tracks. I like the way they've got the space laid out in there. It's not going to have as much power, but I don't think it needs it. So I'm going to lean towards the Trailblazer. Although, if the Malibu had a little more updates, a little more attention paid to it, then it might be competitive, but then it'd be more expensive and probably not make the list.
yeah, if we're talking about feet of car for the dollar, Malibu wins
Sure,
hands down because it's
absolutely.
huge. And I will say that as even though I'm going to vote for the Trailblazer as well, so Trailblazer is the win. I will say if you are a family with young kids and you're looking for something that's safe and affordable and has a big back seat, Malibu's got a huge back seat, so it's easily going to swallow those rear-facing child seats. Actually, significantly better than anything else that we have discussed on this list so far. So if you got kids, I would lean towards the Malibu because really there's not a lot else that's new that will have a warranty that's going to also be able to accommodate some of those larger seats there. So with
Right.
that out of the way, let's do another fun pairing from the same manufacturer. And this one I could see a lot of people looking into actually
Hmm.
Venue or Kona. So the Hyundai Venue is their smallest little thing, $19,900. It's not as practical as a Soul. It's actually kind of smaller in a lot of dimensions, but mostly inside. It's very small
Hmm.
inside. Or the kind of unusual looking Kona for $24,350. That's nearly 20% more.
It is. If the Venue was a little more soul-like, I think it would add to its appeal. And the reason we chose Soul is because of all the things it does so well for the price tag. I know we're talking about a big bump, but I do feel like the Kona is pretty good value for the money. I like the styling on it. I appreciate in this latest generation that styling is across the board from their gas to their hybrid to their electric. Like all of those things line up. It looks good. It's very future forward. The Venue does not feel that way. It does feel like an older
Mm.
design. Obviously, if you can't if it comes to the budget and you can't afford it, it's not saying anything against the venue, but I think I'm leaning towards the Kona.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I would definitely go with the Kona as well, simply because the venue definitely comes across as more of a bargain basement vehicle, and I think it's worth the price upgrade. Also from the Hyundai Kia conglomerate, we have our next one, which is the Seltos, and the Seltos versus the Impreza, two under $25,000 all-wheel drive vehicles. Seltos is a little bit more expensive. It's about $2,000, $1,500 more expensive, but we have a boxier format. Impreza is that more traditional hatchback vibe.
Yeah, and between those two, I think I'm leaning towards the Impreza. Both of these are going to be an affordable all-wheel drive option. I prefer cars over SUVs or crossovers if I can. So if it's my money going down, I'd rather pay less for the car than more for the crossover. So I'd be leaning towards Impreza here.
I'm willing to toss Impreza a bone there. So let's go with Impreza. Let's move on. And then that means that we must decide whether CX-30 should be in the group or out of the group so our brackets still work. So CX-30 barely in this group, $24,995. You do get all-wheel drive, but you get an older 6-speed automatic transmission. I'm really torn about that.
It's tough. This is very much a style feature. It's a feel car, and it's going to be, for the dollar, one of the nicest feeling cars. And I just mean people are going to look at you and go, "Oh, that's a nice car." You're going to hop out of it and feel like, "Oh, this is a nice car." But they're going to be compromises to get that feeling at this price point.
Yeah,
I think it's okay if we drop it, but also recognize that it's unique in its space, and I think that's why it both gets a pass and maybe doesn't move forward.
I also have another thought process here.
Okay.
Would you rather have a Kona or a CX-30? I think I would rather have a CX-30.
I would probably lean towards the CX-30.
And there we have
Yeah.
it. Let's drop the Kona. So here we
Okay.
go. All right, now it's time for our next bracket stage. We'll just go lightning round here. Vote
Yep.
for K4 or Kia Soul.
Oh, tough. Kia Soul.
I would go Soul as well.
Yeah.
Kicks or Elantra? I think I would go Kicks.
I'm Kicks as well.
And then we have Civic versus Versa. This one's tricky for me, and I'm going to go Versa because of its price tag. Not that it's better than a Civic, but
Yeah.
value-wise, I would go Versa. I would go all the way to the floor.
Okay. I think the Civic is on the more expensive end of this, and I don't think it offers something terribly different than the rest of the options. So for that, I'll also go Versa.
And that brings us along to the Kona getting resurrected because I did my brackets wrong. So Kona versus Trailblazer.
Trailblazer.
I could handle that. And then Impreza versus CX-30. I would go CX-30. I think it's just prettier.
Yeah. And the Impreza won by a hair for me on the last one, so I think CX-30 is the call.
Is CX-30 pretty enough to win over the Trailblazer? That's our next bracket.
It's pretty. I mean, but the Trailblazer is also fairly attractive. They're very different kinds of attractive.
Yeah.
The
Trailblazer's
Trailblazer is a little more. Trailblazer's cheap and it's more toy-ish, where the CX-30 is going for a sophisticated look.
But you aren't going to get all-wheel. Yeah, you aren't going to get all-wheel drive on that Trailblazer for its base model, so you have to check that option box. Then you're about the same. You're close to the same price.
Yeah, CX-30.
I can handle CX-30.
Yeah.
And then that brings us along to Versa or Kicks.
Oh, Nissan versus Nissan.
I would go Kicks because it's newer.
Switch Kicks. Yeah.
That means, of course, we must now decide Kicks or CX-30. I think I would lean Kicks. And I know that's going to offend Mazda fans, but Kicks is brand new. Yes, it has a CVT, but it does have a long warranty as well. And we're talking about a new car where the new car shopper is probably not going to keep it outside of that longer powertrain warranty we find on it.
Yeah, and the Kicks is going to come in quite a bit less expensive, meaning you can option it out, more. I think I'm with you. I think the CX-30 had quite a run, but the Kicks is a great offering.
And then that means, of course, we must now decide Kicks versus Soul. And I will just go with your vote on this because we actually owned a Soul for a while. We had a 2016 Soul EV, so maybe I'm biased there on the Soul front. I will argue Soul definitely boxier and more practical than Kicks, cheaper too, but doesn't have all-wheel drive. Longer powertrain warranty though, longer general warranty. What are your thoughts on that? What should someone do?
I've driven a lot of Kia Soul in my life. Like I said, I've recommended it to a few folks, and I think, especially because it's a newer car, it's a newer design, I think I'm going Kicks on this one.
There you have it, everybody. So the best under $25,000 car in America today is the new 2025 Nissan Kicks, and we will have a video on that Kicks coming up very, very soon. So be sure and stay tuned on the other channel. And with that, we will sign off for the day. Hopefully everybody has gotten everything out of this episode they wanted. If you didn't, then email us, hey@autobuyersguide.com. You can also drop us a line somewhere in the show notes. There should be our phone number down there, so you can email us voice questions. You can also call us if you want to, etc. And you'll hear from us in about 2 weeks or so. We're going to try and do this bi-weekly podcast. That's our new mode. See everybody later.
Bye.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide. If discussions about donuts in the parking lot is what you came here looking for, well then my friend you're lost. Because our very human host Alex, we swear he's not a boss. Does he respect the cars a lot? He does perhaps too much, yes probably. Would it help you